Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this month's webinar, which is tips on Taiwan medical device regulations. Today's webinar is going to be presented by one of our senior consultants, Rachel, who has been with Brandwood for around 5 years. So I'll hand over to Rachel in just a moment. The routine of giving you a little bit of background on Brandwood Biomedical to start with, and promise you it's only one slide. Brandwood Biomedical is a quality and regulatory consultancy firm based headquartered in Sydney, Australia, and we focus primarily on medical devices, diagnostics, and also combination products. We provide services for everything from initial product development, support with technical writing, through to regulatory submissions, and also post-market. With all of our clients, we do bring a global perspective. We've got various experience throughout the office dealing with a number of different markets, not just focused here in the Asia Pacific, but also through other markets such as Europe and the US. We're highly networked and highly engaged. We invest a lot of time in working with both industry groups and the regulators throughout the region, which enables us I guess to have the best understanding of clients' issues, concerns, and also being able to work with regulators on how to resolve those sorts of issues. We've got offices as I said, headquartered here in Sydney, Australia. We have a small office in New Zealand and also our office in Beijing. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the webinar to Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Thanks, Graham, for the introductions. Today I'm going to take you through to understand Taiwan medical device market and how to tackle the unique medical device requirement for Taiwan FDA. The topics will be covered today: an overview of the medical device market in Taiwan and regulatory framework and reform relating to medical device registrations. QSD is a quality system documentation review process, classifications and associate regulatory requirements, and the labeling requirements. By the end of the webinar, you should have an overview of Taiwan medical device market and TFDA regulations requirements. Overview of Taiwan and medical device market. So here's Taiwan, and the neighbor include China to the west, Japan to the north, and Philippines from the south. Taiwan has a population of 23.5 million, with 13% of the population over the age of 65. MOHW has indicated that Taiwan populations will continue to grow up to until 2021, along with the increase in population of seniors. Market size are more than 3.5 billion, projected growth 7.7% until 2019. And Taiwan is one of the Asia's most advanced markets. Over 70% of the high-end device imported, and with US contribute over 30%. Okay, so there are some factors that makes Taiwan attractive for medical device manufacturers. Sophisticated market, demand for the latest technology. As more than 70% market share contributed by foreign manufacturers, especially at high-tech end of the market. Demographics, more than 13% of the populations over the age of 65. This elderly population continue to grow. In order to keep its people active and healthy, Taiwan has a demand for medical device and pharmaceuticals. Deliveries, most care as public patients. Almost 99% of the 23.5 million populations are covered by the national health insurance systems. Taiwan's health expenditure was 6.3% of gross domestic products and expected to grow annually at the rate of 8.5%. 4.8, sorry, putting further strains on healthcare expenditure in the coming years. As living standard rise in Asia, there is increased demand for medical care in Asia. Taiwan is in the transportation hub of the Asia-Pacific region, which makes Taiwan an ideal location for entering the emerging market of Asia. So all those factors makes Taiwan as one of the most exciting medical device markets for import opportunities. Now we're moving on to agency and legislations. Medical device regulations, structures and overview of regulation reform. The agency, which is the Taiwan Food and Drug Administration. The Taiwan Medical Device Management System was reformed in year 2000. Since 2005, it has been a requirement for all medical devices in Taiwan market to be licensed or registered. TFDA, the Taiwan Food and Drug Administration, was established in 2010 under the Department of Health as the competent authorities of food, drugs, and medical device and cosmetics. In 2013, the administrative level of the Department of Health was elected to be a Ministry of Health and Welfare. This is an overview of Taiwan infrastructure, the legislations. Taiwan has the law, which is the Pharmaceutical Act. 2015 fifth version is a state of art. This is a top-tier regulation governing Taiwan medical device and pharmaceuticals, including pre- and post-markets. Then Taiwan has the regulations. The regulations for registrations and management of medical devices. This provides pathways and detailed lists of documents that require for pre-market submissions. There are other regulations, for example, regulations for governing the management of medical devices, including the post-market regulations, and regulation of good manufacture practice. Then there are orders, guidance, methods, and standards. For examples, guidance for medical device labeling, post-market activities, and product-specific preclinical guidance. Taiwan FDA has published roughly 30 product-specific preclinical guidance documents as reference for product registrations. For examples, preclinical guidance documents for cardiovascular stent, which provide guidance for drafting pre-market submissions. Taiwan accepts most of the international standards. In summary, Taiwan has the Act, which is the top-tier regulations for medical device and pharmaceuticals. And there are regulations, orders, guidance, and standards. They are prepared in accordance to the top-tier regulation, which is the Pharmaceutical Affairs Act. There's a link at the end of the slide here. It's the English version of the Pharmaceutical Affairs Act. So feel free to have a look. We're moving on to some key elements to register products in Taiwan. What are the must-have requirements? Taiwan focuses on the safety and efficacy of the devices. Typically, it's the preclinical testing report and the quality control certificate, the clinical evidence report, and the full technical file in STED format for the high-risk devices are required. Taiwan must have the country of origin approval by providing the free sale certificate or certificate of foreign government as the evidence of the devices are marketed and sold in the country of origin. The information on the evidence must be in line with the initial submission to TFDA, such as the product name, model numbers, and the manufacturer details. The name and the address must be identical to the initial submissions. Also required to have predicates in Taiwan. Typically, the substantial equivalency table is required as part of the pre-market submissions. Needs to have a valid GMP and QSD certifications for devices above Class 1. Must have local Taiwan sponsor. The local representative in Taiwan, they are acting as the license holder of the registrations. The local sponsor can be either a distributor or a third party, for example, a consulting firm. The advantage of using consulting firm as a local representative is when the manufacturers can independently set up their own arrangement with the distributor, can change the distributor or commercial arrangements. Overall, there are administrative side of requirements and the technical side of requirements. There are some common documents for registered products for Class 2 and 3 devices in Taiwan. The Chinese and English labeling materials. Taiwan is very particular on the instruction for use and labels. I will walk through TFDA's key labeling requirements in the next slides. And the QSD certificate is required for devices above Class 1. And again, we'll go into details in the next slide. Preclinical and quality testing reports. Taiwan FDA requires comprehensive testing report for the representative model number to be registered. The testing report generally needs to include hypothesis, acceptance criteria, testing methods, testing data, and the conclusions. Product information, just the product descriptions. Clinical evidence report is required for high-risk device. For Class 2 devices are not required as part of the initial applications, but sometimes may request during the review process. Authorization letter from the legal manufacturers to local agent. There are templates and examples available on the TFDA website. And the sponsor business license. Overall, in summary, there are technical documents like the preclinical testing report, the QC testing report, and the administrative documents are like free sale certificate and authorization forms are required as part of the initial applications. Then we're moving on to the quality system documentations, which is QSD certificate. It's pretty much is another name for Taiwan's good manufacture practice. Taiwan has a good manufacturing practice for quality systems, which is harmonized from ISO 13485. Actually, the ISO 13485 is actually written in the regulations. Taiwan FDA requires manufacturers to obtain QSD certificate before registered products in Taiwan for devices above Class 1. QSD certificate is typically on the critical manufacture steps of the medical device manufacture process. Typically, it is the manufacturing facility where the quality control is conducted before the final product release. According to the regulations, devices without valid QSD certificates are not allowed to legally supply in Taiwan. So there are 3 pathways to QSD certificate. First pathway is the bridge pathway for US manufacturers. Will require the EIR, which is the Establishment Inspection Reports, and the certificate to foreign government, and the ISO 13485 certificate. For Europe manufacturers can go through the bridge pathway by providing the inspection report by the 11 European notified bodies and the free sale certificate and the ISO 13485 certificate. And there is a standard pathway for ISO, need to provide ISO 13485 certificate and a full quality manual, quality procedure, manufacturing flow chart. So in summary, if the manufacturing facility is in US or Europe, are eligible to register through the simplified pathway by providing either the EIR, the Establishment Inspection Report, or the notified body report from the 11 notified bodies to waive the full quality system documents. However, the reviewing timeline are the same for all pathways. Let's go through an overview of QSD. So the manufacturer needs to obtain the QSD certificates before product registrations. And the certificate is valid for 3 years. the renewal submission needs to file to TFDA 6 months before the expiry date. Either the new QSD applications or the renewal QSD applications, the reviewing timeline is 120 calendar days. It's a TFDA indicative timeline. For Class 1 non-sterile, non-measured devices are not required to have QSD certificate. Let's go through the reviewing process for QSD applications. So once the application lodged to Taiwan FDA, the responsible reviewer will do a high-level review to ensure all documents have been provided. Then we'll pass on the submission to a third party to conduct clinical review. According to Taiwan FDA indicative timeline, the manufacturer are expected to hear back from the third party in 30 days and to respond to any review questions. The third party normally allows the manufacturer or sponsor 60 days to provide response to any review questions. Once the response submitted to the third party, they will review and provide decision back to Taiwan FDA. Taiwan FDA then do a final review and provide decision to the manufacturer. So the overall Taiwan FDA indicative reviewing timeline is 120 days for QSD applications. This timeline does not include any time spent to prepare the response to any review questions. In practice, the reviewing timeline is heavily dependent on the workload and resource at Taiwan FDA. Given our current experience, there are backlog of applications at Taiwan FDA, so the minimum timeline to get approval, we're looking around 6 to 9 months minimum. For renewal QSD applications, we will suggest to submit the application sooner than later. Okay, now we're going through the general manufacturing process flow. This is a quality system process, design control, manufacturing, testing, packaging, testing, then boxing, labeling, sterilization, final testing, and final release. There's different facilities, plant A to 4, and sterilizations. So there are 2 examples of the manufacturing process. For product A, all manufacture steps are conducted at plant A1. In this case, the QSD manufacture facility will be at plant A. Sorry, plant number 1 for product A. This is mostly the case for Taiwan manufacturer. For product B, a single product is manufactured in multiple facilities. So in this case, how do you determine the manufacturing facility for QSD certificate in this case? So there are some key factors. QSD certificate, the manufacturing facility, normally at the critical step of the manufacturing process, and it's typically at the quality control, final release manufacture facility. The QSD manufacture facility will be linked to the product registrations. So the manufacture facility will show on the labeling and instruction for use, as well as the registration certificate after approval. So once the QSD is approved, we can start prepare for the product registrations. The first step to start the product registrations is to determine the classifications. In alignment with other global regulatory authorities, Taiwan FDA has adapted risk-based classifications and divided medical device into 17 categories, pretty much in line with the US classification categories. The classification determined by the level of the risk of the device, so increase the level of the risk to the patient, the higher the classifications. And the level of the risk should be determined by the medical device's intended purpose. We can see from the table here, for Class 1 devices, the submission document is purely the administrative documents, the declaration statements only. For Class 2, There are technical data required, such as the preclinical testing report and the QC testing report. For Class 3 devices, the full technical file in the STED format will be required as part of the pre-market submissions. So the higher the risk, the more documents are required as a part of the initial submissions. Now we're going through the TFDA reviewing timeline and reviewing process for Class 2 devices. So once the submission submitted to TFDA, the manufacturer or the sponsor are expecting to hear back the initial feedback from Taiwan FDA in 75 calendar days. It's roughly about 2.5 months with formal review questions. Then the manufacturer and the sponsor has 60 days to respond to TFDA. Once the response feedback to TFDA, Taiwan FDA has 65 calendar days to review the response and provide a final decision to the manufacturer. Class 3 devices, the reviewing process is pretty much the same as the Class 2 devices applications. The only difference is the reviewing timeline. The initial feedback the manufacturer or the sponsor should hear back from Taiwan FDA is around 105 calendar days, roughly about 3.5 to 4 months time. And after the response review questions submitted to Taiwan FDA has 95 calendar days to finalize the applications and provide feedback to the manufacturer. This is purely because Class 3 device application require additional documents. For example, the full technical file, the essential principle checklist, then therefore that causes a delay and the reviewing timeline is slightly longer than Class 2 devices. This is an overview of the pre-market submission documents across Class 1 to 3 and the novel devices. For Class 1 devices, it's purely the administrative documents, which they are all self-declarations. Even though the preclinical testing report and the QC testing reports are not part of the initial submissions, but the manufacturer must hold those testing reports on file, they are subject to post-market activities. And the labeling also must comply with the Taiwan requirements. For Class 2, 3, and the novel device, the common documents plus the GMP and QSD certifications are required. For Class 2, the technical file, clinical evidence report are not part of the initial submissions, but they may be required to review during the reviewing process. For Class 2 devices, if you have the US and Europe approval, it can be exempted from providing preclinical and QC testing report. And again, they may be requested during the reviewing process. For Class 3 devices, apart from the common documents and QSD application, QSD certificate, the full technical file in an STED format is required, including the clinical evidence report and the essential principle checklist. For novel device, the full technical file, including the clinical evidence report, are required. So the message here is the higher the classification, the more documents will be required as part of the initial applications. So for Class 2 devices, if you have the US approval or the European approval, which is the EC certificate, the preclinical testing and QC testing report can be exempted to provide as part of the initial applications. Please be careful. The product name and the manufacturer informations and the model number must be identical to the submission that's submitted to TFDA. For Class 3 submissions, the full GHTF technical file in the STED format is required. This is the content page from the GHTF. stat format. This include the device descriptions, product specifications, essential principle checklist, and the risk management report. Design and the manufacturing informations, product verifications and validations, labeling, and clinical evidence report. So for clinical evidence report, Taiwan accepts international clinical data for most of the medical devices, but there are some devices will require local trials. Here are the guidance. I won't go into detail. Please feel free to have a look after the webinar. Labeling and instruction for use. Taiwan is very particular in labeling requirements. It has been updated after the regulations of registration of medical devices. There are additional requirements after the update. There is summarize of the updated labeling requirements in Taiwan. The warning statement, contraindications, precautions, and the side effect must be bold in black or the text in red and marked in a red box. The manufacturer and sponsor information must be included in the Chinese IFU. The Chinese product name must not include any letter, number, or symbol. Model numbers and specifications must be included at the end of the Chinese IFU. Those are the key requirements. We would suggest to avoid delay on submitting application to Taiwan FDA. Any minor updates can be done during the reviewing process upon request. This is a summary of device registrations in Taiwan. For Class 1, it's purely the administrative documents. For Class 2 are the administrative documents plus the common documents that we mentioned before. For example, it's country of origin approval, preclinical testings, and QC testing. The clinical evaluation report is not part of the initial submissions if you have predicates in Taiwan. For Class 3 devices, it's the administrative documents plus the common documents and also the technical files in the STED format and the essential requirement checklist according to the GHTF format. So after we have the product registration approved, we need to be mindful on the certificate renewal. There are two types of re-registration submissions. The first one is the product re-registrations. Product registration is valid for 5 years. The re-registration should be submitted within the 6 months before the registration certificate expires. For Class 2 and 3, if the manufacturer failed to submit the application, the renewal applications within the timeline, TFDA still accepts the re-registration submission 6 months after the registration expires. However, there will be more documents required as part of the submissions. For Class 1 devices, if the manufacturer failed to submit the application before the 6 month period, the manufacturer may need to put in a new applications. The second re-registration submission is the quality system documentations. The QSD certificate is valid for 3 years, and the re-registration must be submitted 6 months before the registration certificate expired. According to the regulation, without valid QSD certificate, the devices are not allowed to legally supply in Taiwan. So it is important to ensure that all certificate renewal applications are submitted within the timeline to be able to continue supply the products in Taiwan. So the next topic is the product variations. How does manufacturer determine whether variation to the approved products require notifications to Taiwan FDA? There are a few types of the variation applications in Taiwan. However, they can summarize in two types. The first type is the technical variations. If the manufacturer has changed the intended purpose of the device or change of the indication for use of the device. The technical documents will be required as part of the initial applications. For example, the preclinical testing and the QC testing report. And the second type of variation is administrative variations. Change of the product name, change of the manufacturer sponsor information, change of the instruction for use, add or remove model number and specifications. Depending on the nature of the variation, there may be documents or report requests during the reviewing process. For example, if to add model numbers and specifications, the preclinical testing of the new model numbers and the QC testing of the new model numbers will be required. If it's the change of the instruction for use, for example, adding the warning statements, there may be additional documents required of the reason of adding the warning statement. So what has changed? So for Class 3 devices, registrations are required to submit the full technical file in an STED format according to the GSTF format. There are specific labeling requirements and formats. Taiwan FDA now only accept 11 notified bodies for the purpose of the QSD abridged pathway. Is your notified body one of the favorite 11 to be able to go through the abridged pathway? So what's next in Taiwan FDA? Taiwan FDA is now drafting the new Medical Device Act. They still haven't published the draft and there is no ETA. In conclusions, Taiwan has defined document requirements for device registration depending on the classification of the devices. TFDA's review is focused on the comparison with established predicate devices, detailed preclinical testing, and quality control reports. For high-risk devices, the GSTF format, STED technical file, and essential principle checklists are required as part of the pre-market submissions. So after the product approved, the manufacturer needs to be mindful of the renewal application for QSD and product registrations to ensure applications submitted within the timeline and approved in time for product to continue supply and market in Taiwan. Thank you for attending the webinar.
Thanks, Rachel. We do have a couple of questions that have come through, so we'll work through those. Just very briefly, I did forget to introduce myself at the beginning. My name's Grant Bennett. I'm the CEO of Brandwood. I will eventually get that right. So, Rachel, just to run through these, and again, as I said earlier on, if I don't get to your question, we will definitely come back to you this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are. So some of the questions. If the product registrations is expiring and you've got some technical changes, what is the process? Can you actually do those technical changes with your renewal?
Okay, so for renewal submissions in the variation application needs to submit separately. The renewal submission is mainly an administrative process on an applications. It is an application to request extensions on the existing registrations. So it is under the assumptions no change to the device since the last approval and all information remain current. Taiwan FDA indicative timeline for renewal submission is roughly around 30 days. And I would suggest to submit the renewal submissions. Once approved, then submit the variation application to notify TGA, just in case we miss out the timeline for the renewal submission. That's probably the safest way.
Thanks, Rach. What is your current experience on Class 2 devices reviewing timelines?
Okay, so for reviewing timeline, it's depending on a number of factors. For example, the completeness of the documents, the nature of the devices. However, from our recent experience, there are backlog of application at TFDA. The average reviewing timeline is roughly about 9 to 12 months. Taiwan FDA allows 60 days to prepare for response to any review questions. So if the manufacturer or sponsor can provide the response to Taiwan FDA before the due date, can potentially shorten the reviewing timeline. And also need to proactively communicate with the reviewer. So some of the response may be solved over the phone.
Thanks. Another question here. Individuals made some recent changes to the IFU to make it compliant to both Chinese and European requirements. Would those changes be notifiable to the TFDA?
Okay, so variation to the Chinese IFU is one type of the variation applications in Taiwan FDA. Taiwan FDA has also published a notice of change that will not consider as notifiable change. So anything outside of this notice will likely to require notification to Taiwan FDA. This really depends, but the changes that are not considered notifiable change are including change of the material of the packaging and change of the font type or the size or the ratio of the approved labeling. I hope that answers your questions.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm just having a quick look here. Does the registration abridged pathway only apply to Class 2 devices?
Okay, you are correct. Only Class 2 devices are eligible for registered device through a bridge pathway. If the evidence of the device can be sold and marketed in US and Europe, please ensure the detailed information on the evidence of the FDA approval and the Europe approval are identical to the Taiwan pre-market submissions. For example, the product name, the model number, the manufacturer information, they need to be identical. We have seen the applications of the US approval or Europe approval, they have different model numbers. Taiwan FDA will not accept those as the evidence unless a statement from the authority who issued the evidence is provided. For example, we've seen manufacturers has different product names or different model numbers. Even the product is the same, they market the product differently in different countries. So in that case, the model numbers and the product names are different on the FDA approval or European approval. So Taiwan FDA will not accept those as the evidence. So they probably will have to go through the standard pathway.
I think just the final question, Rach, and for those that we've missed, we'll definitely come back to. Just a question, is it possible to extend the response timelines for TFDA review questions during an application?
Yes, it is possible. Typically, Taiwan FDA allows the manufacturer or sponsor 60 days to prepare and submit the response, as mentioned in my webinar. But if the manufacturer needs more time to prepare the response, it's typically for the Taiwan local sponsor to send through the extension request to Taiwan FDA. And Taiwan FDA normally allows an extension of 1 month and can only request the extension once for one submissions.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. We do have a couple of questions we'll follow up on separately. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today for the Taiwan webinar.